Chapter 16. A Witless Aladdin, the Gate to the World. In the course of his present stay in Chicago, Drouet paid some slight attention to the secret order to which he belonged. During his last trip he had received a new light on its importance. "I tell you," said another drummer to him, "it's a great thing. Look at Hasenstab. He isn't so deuced clever. Of course he's got a good house behind him, but that won't do alone. I tell you it's his degree. He's a way-up Mason, and that goes a long way. He's got a secret sign that stands for something." Drouet resolved then and there that he would take more interest in such matters. So when he got back to Chicago, he repaired to his local lodge headquarters. "I say, Drouet," said Mr. Harry Quinsell, an individual who was very prominent in this local branch of the Elks, "you're the man that can help us out." It was after the business meeting and things were going socially with a hum. Drouet was bobbing around, chatting and joking with a score of individuals whom he knew. "What are you up to?" he inquired genially, turning a smiling face upon his secret brother. "We're trying to get up some theatricals for 2 weeks from today, and we want to know if you don't know some young lady who could take a part. It's an easy part." "Sure," said Drouet. "What is it?" He did not trouble to remember that he knew no one to whom he could appeal on this score. His innate good nature, however, dictated a favorable reply. "Well, now, I'll tell you what we're trying to do," went on Mr. Quinsell. "We are trying to get a new set of furniture for the lodge. There isn't enough money in the treasury at the present time, and we thought we would raise it a little by a little entertainment." "Sure," interrupted Drouet, "that's a good idea. Several of the boys around here have got talent. There's Harry Burbeck, he does a fine black bass turn. Mac Lewis is all right at heavy dramatics. Did you ever hear him recite Over the Hills?" "Never did." "Well, I'll tell you, he does it fine." "And you want me to get some woman to take a part?" questioned Drouet, anxious to terminate the subject and get on to something else. "What are you going to play?" "Under the Gaslight," said Mr. Quinsell, mentioning Augustin Daly's famous production, which had worn from a great public success down to an amateur theatrical favorite, with many of the troublesome accessories cut out and the dramatis personae reduced to the smallest possible number. Drouet had seen this play some time in the past. "That's it," he said. "That's a fine play. It will go all right. You ought to make a lot of money out of that." "We think we'll do very well," Mr. Quinsell replied. "Don't you forget now," he concluded, Drouet showing signs of restlessness, "some young woman to take the part of Laura." "Sure, I'll attend to it." He moved away, forgetting almost all about it the moment Mr. Quinsell had ceased talking. He had not even thought to ask the time or place. Drouet was reminded of his promise a day or two later by the receipt of a letter announcing that the first rehearsal was set for the following Friday evening, and urging him to kindly forward the young lady's address at once, in order that the part might be delivered to her. "Now, who's the deuce do I know?" asked the drummer, reflectively, scratching his rosy ear. "I don't know anyone that knows anything about amateur theatricals." He went over in memory the names of a number of women he knew and finally fixed on one, largely because of the convenient location of her home on the west side, and promised himself that as he came out that evening he would see her. When, however, he started west on the car he forgot, and was only reminded of his delinquency by an item in the evening news. A small 3-line affair under the head of Secret Society Notes, which stated the Custer Lodge of the Order of Elks would give a theatrical performance in Avery Hall on the 16th, when Under the Gaslight would be produced. "George!" exclaimed Drouet. "I forgot that." "What?" inquired Carrie. They were at their little table in the room which might have been used for a kitchen, where Carrie occasionally served a meal. Tonight the fancy had caught her, and the little table was spread with a pleasing repast. Why, my lodge entertainment. They're going to have a play, and they wanted me to get some young lady to take a part. What is it they're going to play? Under the Gaslight. When? On the 16th. Well, why don't you? Asked Carrie. I don't know anyone, he replied. Suddenly he looked up. Say, he said, how would you like to take the part? Me? Said Carrie. I can't act. How do you know? Questioned Drouet reflectively. Because, answered Carrie, I never did. Nevertheless, she was pleased to think he would ask. Her eyes brightened, for if there was anything that enlisted her sympathies, it was the art of the stage. True to his nature, Drouet clung to this idea as an easy way out. That's nothing. You can act all you have to down there. No, I can't, said Carrie weakly, very much drawn toward the proposition and yet fearful. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Now, why don't you do it? They need someone, and it will be lots of fun for you. Oh, no, it won't, said Carrie seriously. You'd like that. I know you would. I've seen you dancing around here and giving imitations, and that's why I asked you. You're clever enough, all right. No, I'm not, said Carrie shyly. Now, I'll tell you what you do. You go down and see about it. It'll be fun for you. The rest of the company isn't going to be any good. They haven't any experience. What do they know about theatricals? He frowned as he thought of their ignorance. Hand me the coffee, he added. I don't believe I could act, Charlie, Carrie went on pettishly. You don't think I could, do you? Sure, out of sight. I bet you make a hit. Now you want to go, I know you do. I knew it when I came home. That's why I asked you. What is the play, did you say? Under the Gaslight. What part would they want me to take? Oh, one of the heroines, I don't know. What sort of play is it? Well, said Drouet, whose memory for such things was not the best. It's about a girl who gets kidnapped by a couple of crooks, a man and a woman that live in the slums. She had some money or something, and they wanted to get it. I don't know now how it did go exactly. Don't you know what part I would have to take? No, I don't, to tell the truth. He thought a moment. Yes, I do, too. Laura. That's the thing. You're to be Laura. And he can't remember what the part is like? To save me, Cat, I can't, he answered. I ought to, too. I've seen the play enough. There's a girl in it that was stolen when she was an infant, was picked off the street or something, and she's the one that's hounded by the two old criminals I'm telling you about. He stopped with a mouthful of pie poised on a fork before his face. She comes very near getting drowned. No, that's not it. I'll tell you what I'll do, he concluded hopelessly. I'll get you the book. I can't remember now for the life of me. Well, I don't know, said Carrie, when he had concluded, her interest and desire to shine dramatically struggling with her timidity for the mastery. I might go if you thought I'd do all right. Of course you'll do, said Drouet, who in his efforts to enthuse Carrie had interested himself. Do you think I'd come here and urge you to do something that I didn't think you would make a success of? You can act all right. It'll be good for you. When must I go? Said Carrie reflectively. The first rehearsal is Friday night. I'll get the part for you tonight. All right, said Carrie resignedly. I'll do it, but if I make a failure now, it's your fault. You won't fail, assured Drouet. Just act as you do around here. Be natural. You're all right. I've often thought you'd make a good corking good actress. Did you really? Asked Carrie. That's right, said the drummer. He little knew as he went out of the door that night what a secret flame he had rekindled in the bosom of the girl he left behind. Carrie was possessed of that sympathetic, impressionable nature which, ever in the most developed form, has been the glory of the drama. She was created with that passivity of soul which is always the mirror of the active world. She possessed an innate taste for imitation and no small ability. Even without practice, she could sometimes restore dramatic situations she had witnessed by recreating, before her mirror, the expressions of the various faces taking part in the scene. She loved to modulate her voice after the conventional manner of the distressed heroine, and repeat such pathetic fragments as appealed most to her sympathies. Of late, seeing the airy grace of the ingenue in several well-constructed plays, she had been moved to secretly imitate it, and many were the little movements and expressions of the body in which she indulged from time to time in the privacy of her chamber. On several occasions when Drouet had caught her admiring herself, as he imagined, in the mirror, she was doing nothing more than recalling some little grace of the mouth or the eyes, which she had witnessed in another. Under his airy accusation she mistook this for vanity, and accepted the blame with a faint sense of error, though, as a matter of fact, it was nothing more than the first subtle outcroppings of an artistic nature, endeavoring to recreate the perfect likeness of some phase of beauty which appealed to her. In such feeble tendencies, be it known, such outworking of desire to reproduce life, lies the basis of all dramatic art. Now, when Carrie heard Drouet's laudatory opinion of her dramatic ability, her body tingled with satisfaction. Like the flame which welds the loosened particles into a solid mass, his words united those floating wisps of feeling which she had felt, but never believed, concerning her possible ability, and made them into a gaudy shred of hope. Like all human beings, she had a touch of vanity. She felt that she could do things if only she had a chance. How often had she looked at the well-dressed actresses on the stage and wondered how she would look, how delightful she would feel if only she were in their place. The glamour, the tense situation, the fine clothes, the applause, these had lured her until she felt that she too could act, that she too could compel acknowledgment of power. Now she was told that she really could, that little things she had done about the house had made even him feel her power. It was a delightful sensation while it lasted. When Drouet had gone, she sat down in her rocking chair by the window to think about it. As usual, imagination exaggerated the possibilities for her. It was as if he had put 50 cents in her hand and she had exercised the thoughts of $1,000. She saw herself in a score of pathetic situations in which she assumed a tremulous voice and suffering manner. Her mind delighted itself with scenes of luxury and refinement, situations in which she was the cynosure of all eyes, the arbiter of all fates. As she rocked to and fro, she felt the tensity of woe and abandonment, the magnificence of wrath after deception, the languor of sorrow after defeat. Thoughts of all the charming women she had seen in plays, every fancy, every illusion which had concerning the stage, now came back as a returning tide after the ebb. Feelings and a determination which the occasion did not warrant. Drouet dropped in at the lodge when he went downtown, and swashed around with great air as Quinzel met him. "Where's that young lady you were going to get for us?" asked the latter. "I've got her," said Drouet. "Have you?" said Quinzel, rather surprised by his promptness. "That's good. What's her address?" And he pulled out his notebook in order to be able to send her part to her. "You want to send her her part?" asked the drummer. "Yes." "Well, I'll take it. I'm going right by her house in the morning." "What did you say her address was? We only want it in case we have any information to send her." 29 Ogden Place. "And her name?" "Carrie Mendenda," said the drummer, firing at random. The lodge members knew him to be single. That sounds like somebody that can act, doesn't it? Said Quincel. Yes, it does. He took the part home to Carrie and handed it to her with the manner of one who does a favor. He says that's the best part. Do you think you can do it? I don't know until I look it over. I'm afraid now that I said I would. Oh, go on. What have you got to be afraid of? It's a cheap company. The rest of them aren't as good as you are. Well, I'll see, said Carrie, pleased to have the part for all her misgivings. He sidled around, dressing and fidgeting before he arranged to make his next remark. They were getting ready to print the programs, he said, and I gave them the name Carrie Medenda. Was that all right? Yes, I guess so, said his companion, looking up at him. She was thinking it was slightly strange. If you didn't make a hit, he went on. Oh, yes, she answered, rather pleased now with his caution. It was clever for Drouet. I didn't want to introduce you as my wife because you'd feel worse than if you didn't go. They all know me so well, but you'll go all right. Anyhow, you'll probably never meet any of them again. Oh, I don't care, said Carrie desperately. She was determined now to have a try at the fascinating game. Drouet breathed a sigh of relief. He had been afraid that he was about to precipitate another conversation upon the marriage question. The part of Laura, as Carrie found out when she began to examine it, was one of suffering and tears. As delineated by Mr. Daly, it was true to the most sacred traditions of melodrama as he found it when he began his career. The sorrowful demeanor, the tremolo music, the long explanatory cumulative addresses, all were there. Poor fellow, read Carrie, consulting the text and drawing her voice out pathetically. Martin, be sure and give him a glass of wine before he goes. She was surprised at the briefness of the entire part, not knowing that she must be on the stage while others were talking, and to not only be there, but also keep herself in harmony with the dramatic movement of the scenes. I think I can do that, though, she concluded. When Drouet came the next night, she was very much satisfied with her day's study. Well, how goes it, Caddy? He said. All right, she laughed. I think I have it memorized nearly. That's good, he said. Let's hear some of it. Oh, I don't know whether I can get up and say it off here, she said bashfully. Well, I don't know why you shouldn't. It'll be easier here than it will there. I don't know about that, she answered. Eventually, she took off the ballroom episode with considerable feeling, forgetting, as she got deeper in the scene, all about Drouet, and letting herself rise to a fine state of feeling. Good, said Drouet. Fine. Out of sight. You're all right, Caddy, I tell you. He was really moved by her excellent representation and the general appearance of the pathetic little figure as it swayed and finally fainted to the floor. He had bounded up to catch her and now held her laughing in his arms. Ain't you afraid you'll hurt yourself? He asked. Not a bit. Well, you're a wonder. Say, I never knew you could do anything like that. I never did either, said Carrie merrily, her face flushed with delight. Well, you can bet that you're all right, said Drouet. You can take my word for that. You won't fail. Chapter 17. A glimpse through the gateway. Hope lightens the eye. To Carrie, very important theatrical performance was to take place at the Avery on conditions which were to make it more noteworthy than was at first anticipated. The little dramatic student had written to Hurstwood the very morning her part was brought her that she was going to take part in a play. I really am, she wrote, feeling that he might jest. I have my part now, honest, truly. Hurstwood smiled in an indulgent way as he read this. I wonder what it is going to be. I must see that. He answered at once, making a pleasant reference to her ability. I haven't the slightest doubt you will make it a success. I haven't the slightest doubt you will make a success. You must come to the park tomorrow morning and tell me all about it. Carrie gladly complied and revealed all the details of the undertaking as she understood it. Well, he said, that's fine. I'm glad to hear it. Of course you will do well. You're so clever. He had truly never seen so much spirit in the girl before. Her tendency to discover a touch of sadness had for the nonce disappeared. As she spoke, her eyes were bright, her cheeks red. She radiated much of the pleasure which her undertakings gave her. For all her misgivings, and they were as plentiful as the moments of the day, she was still happy. She could not repress her delight in doing this little thing, which to an ordinary observer had no importance at all. Hurstwood was charmed by the development of the fact that the girl had capabilities. There is nothing so inspiring in life as the sight of a legitimate ambition, no matter how incipient. It gives color, force, and beauty to the possessor. Carrie was now lightened by a touch of this divine afflatus. She drew to herself commendation from her two admirers which she had not earned. Their affection for her naturally heightened her perception of what she was trying to do, and their approval of what she did. Her inexperience conserved her own exuberant fancy, which ran riot with every straw of opportunity, making of it a golden divining rod, whereby the treasure of life was to be discovered. Let's see, said Hurstwood. I ought to know some of the boys in the lodge. I'm an elk myself. Oh, you mustn't let him know I told you. That's so, said the manager. I'd like for you to be there if you want to come, but I don't see how you can unless he asks you. I'll be there, said Hurstwood affectionately. I can fix it so he won't know you told me. You leave it to me. This interest of the manager was a large thing in itself for the performance, for his standing among the elks was something worth talking about. Already he was thinking of a box with some friends and flowers for Carrie. He would make it a dress suit affair and give the little girl a chance. Within a day or two, Drouet dropped into the Adams Street resort, and he was at once spied by Hurstwood. It was at 5 p.m, and the place was crowded with merchants, actors, managers, politicians, a goodly company of rotund, rosy figures, silk-hatted, starchy-bosomed, beringed and bescarf-pinned to the Queen's taste. John L. Sullivan, the pugilist, was at one end of the glittering bar, surrounded by a company of loudly dressed sports, who were holding a most animated conversation. Drouet came across the floor with a festive stride, a new pair of tan shoes squeaking audibly at his progress. Well, sir, said Hurstwood, I was wondering what had become of you. I thought you had gone out of town again. Drouet laughed. If you don't report more regularly, we'll have to cut you off the list. Couldn't help it, said the drummer. I've been busy. They strolled over toward the bar amid the noisy, shifting company of notables. The dressy manager was shaken by the hand 3 times in as many minutes. I hear your lodge is going to give a performance, observed Hurstwood in the most offhand manner. Yes. Who told you? No one, said Hurstwood. They just sent me a couple of tickets, which I can have for $2. Is it going to be any good? I don't know, replied the drummer. They've been trying to get me to get some woman to take a part. I wasn't intending to go, said the manager easily. I'll subscribe, of course. How are things going over there? How are things over there? All right. They're going to fit things up out of the proceeds. Well, said the manager, I hope they make it a success of it. Have another? He did not intend to say any more. Now, if he should appear on the scene with a few friends, he could say that he had been urged to come along. Drouet had a desire to wipe out the possibility of confusion. I think the girl is going to take a part in it, he said abruptly, after thinking it over. You don't say so. How did that happen? Well, they were short and wanted me to find them someone. I told Carrie, and she seems to want to try. Good for her, said the manager. It'll be a real nice affair. Do her good, too. Has she ever had any experience? Not a bit. Oh, well, it isn't anything very serious. Though, said Drouet, casting off any imputation against Carrie's ability. She picks up her part quick enough. You don't say so, said the manager. Yes, sir. She surprised me the other night. By George, if she didn't. We must give her a nice little send-off, said the manager. I'll look after the flowers. Drouet smiled at his good nature. After the show, you must come with me and we'll have a little supper. I think she'll do all right, said Drouet. I want to see her. She's got to do all right. We'll make her. And the manager gave one of his quick, steely half-smiles, which was a compound of good nature and shrewdness. Carrie, meanwhile, attended the first rehearsal. At this performance, Mr. Quinsell presided, aided by Mr. Millis, a young man who had some qualifications of past experience, which were not exactly understood by anyone. He was so experienced and so businesslike, however, that he came very near being rude, failing to remember, as he did, that the individuals he was trying to instruct were volunteer players and not salaried underlings. Now, Miss Medenda, he said, addressing Carrie, who stood in one part uncertain as to what move to make, you don't want to stand like that. Put expression in your face. Remember, you are troubled over the intrusion of the stranger. Walk so. And he struck out across the Avery stage in a most drooping manner. Carrie did not exactly fancy this suggestion, but the novelty of the situation, the presence of strangers, all more or less nervous, and the desire to do anything rather than make a failure made her timid. She walked in imitation of her mentor as requested, inwardly feeling that there was something strangely lacking. Now, Mrs. Morgan, said the director to one young married woman who was to take the part of Pearl, you sit here. Now, Mr. Bamberger, you stand here, so. Now, what is it you say? Explain, said Mr. Bamberger feebly. He had the part of Ray, Laura's lover, the society individual who was to waver in his thoughts of marrying her, upon finding that she was a waif and a nobody by birth. How is that? What does your text say? Explain, repeated Mr. Bamberger, looking intently at his part. Yes, but it also says, the director remarked, that you are to look shocked. Now say it again and see if you can't look shocked. Explain, demanded Mr. Bamberger vigorously. No, that won't do. Say it this way. Explain. Explain, said Mr. Bamberger, giving a modified imitation. That's better. Now go on. One night, resumed Mrs. Morgan, whose lines came next, father and mother were going to the opera. When they were crossing Broadway, the usual crowd of children accosted them for alms. Hold on, said the director, rushing forward, his arm extended. Put more feeling into what you were saying. Mrs. Morgan looked at him as if she feared a personal assault. Her eye lightened with resentment. Remember, Mrs. Morgan, he added, ignoring the gleam but modifying his manner, that you're detailing a pathetic story. You are now supposed to be telling something that is a grief to you. It requires feeling, repression. Thus, the usual crowd of children accosted them for alms. All right, said Mrs. Morgan. Now, go on. As mother felt in her pocket for some change, her fingers touched a cold and trembling hand which had clutched her purse. Very good, interrupted the director, nodding his head significantly. A pickpocket. Well, exclaimed Mr. Bamberger, speaking the lines that here fell to him. No, Mr. Bamberger, said the director, approaching. Not that way. A pickpocket? Well, so, that's the idea. Don't you think, said Carrie weakly, noticing that it had not been proved yet whether the members of the company knew their lines, let alone the details of expression, that it would be better if we just went through our lines once to see if we know them? We might pick up some points. A very good idea, Miss Medenda, said Mr. Quinsell, who sat at the side of the stage looking serenely on and volunteering opinions which the director did not heed. All right, said the latter, somewhat abashed. It might be well to do it. Then, brightening with a show of authority, suppose we run through, putting in as much expression as we can. Good, said Mr. Quinsell. This hand, resumed Mrs. Morgan, glancing up at Mr. Bamberger and down at her book as the lines proceeded, my mother grasped in her own and so tight that a small, feeble voice uttered an exclamation of pain. Mother looked down, and there beside her was a little ragged girl. Very good, observed the director, now hopelessly idle. The thief, Mr. Bamberger. Louder, put in the director, finding it almost impossible to keep his hands off. The thief, roared poor Bamberger. Yes, but a thief hardly 6 years old with a face like an angel's. Stop, said my mother. What are you doing? Trying to steal, said the child. Don't you know that it is wicked to do so? Asked my father. No, said the girl, but it is dreadful to be hungry. Who told you to steal? Asked my mother. She. There, said the child, pointing to a squalid woman in a doorway opposite, who fled suddenly down the street. That is old Judas, said the girl. Mrs. Morgan read this rather flatly, and the director was in despair. He fidgeted around and then went over to Mr. Quinsell. What do you think of them? He asked. Oh, I guess we'll be able to whip them into shape, said the latter with an air of strength under difficulties. I don't know, said the director. That fellow Bamberger strikes me as being a pretty poor shift for a lover. He's all we've got, said Quinsell, rolling up his eyes. Harrison went back on me at the last minute. Who else can we get? I don't know, said the director. I'm afraid he'll never pick up. At this moment, Bamberger was exclaiming, Pearl, you are joking with me. Look at that now, said the director, whispering behind his hand. My lord, what can you do with a man who drawls out a sentence like that? Do the best you can, said Quinsell consolingly. The rendition ran on in this wise until it came to where Carrie as Laura comes into the room to explain to Ray, who after hearing Pearl's statement about her birth had written the letter repudiating her, which, however, he did not deliver. Bamberger was just concluding the words of Ray, I must go before she returns. Her step, too late, and was cramming the letter in his pocket when she began sweetly with, Ray. Miss Cortland, Bamberger faltered weakly. Carrie looked at him a moment and forgot all about the company present. She began to feel the part and summoned an indifferent smile to her lips, turning as the lines directed and going to a window as if he were not present. She did it with a grace which was fascinating to look upon. Who is that woman? Asked the director, watching Carrie in her little scene with Bamberger. Miss Medenda, said Quinsell. I know her name, said the director, but what does she do? I don't know, said Quinsell. She's a friend of one of our members. Well, she's got more gumption than anyone I've seen here so far. Seems to take an interest in what she's doing. Pretty, too, isn't she? Said Quinsell. The director strolled away without answering. And the second scene, where she was supposed to face the company in the ballroom, she did even better, winning the smile of the director, who volunteered, because of her fascination for him, to come over and speak with her. Were you ever on the stage? He asked insinuatingly. No, said Carrie. You do so well, I thought you might have had some experience. Carrie only smiled consciously. He walked away to listen to Bamberger, who was feebly spouting some ardent line. Mrs. Morgan saw the drift of things and gleamed at Carrie with envious and snapping black eyes. She's some cheap professional, she gave herself the satisfaction of thinking, and scorned and hated her accordingly. The rehearsal ended for one day, and Carrie went home feeling that she had acquitted herself satisfactorily. The words of the director were ringing in her ears, and she longed for an opportunity to tell Hurstwood. She wanted him to know just how well she was doing. Drouet, too, was an object for her confidences. She could hardly wait until he should ask her, and yet she did not have the vanity to bring it up. The drummer, however, had another line of thought tonight, and her little experience did not appeal to him as important. He let the conversation drop, save for what she chose to recite without solicitation. And Carrie was not good at that. He took it for granted that she was doing very well, and he was relieved of further worry. Consequently, he threw Carrie into repression, which was irritating. She felt his indifference keenly and longed to see Hurstwood. It was as if he were now the only friend she had on earth. The next morning, Drouet was interested again, but the damage had been done. She got a pretty letter from the manager saying that by the time she got it, he would be waiting for her in the park. When she came, he shone upon her as the morning sun. "Well, my dear?" he asked. "How did you come out?" "Well enough," she said, still somewhat reduced after Drouet. "Now tell me just what you did. Was it pleasant?" Carrie related the incidents of the rehearsal, warming up as she proceeded. "Well, that's delightful," said Hurstwood. "I'm so glad. I must get over there to see you. When is the next rehearsal?" "Tuesday," said Carrie, "but they don't allow visitors." "I imagine I can get in," said Hurstwood significantly. She was completely restored and delighted by his consideration, but she made him promise not to come around. "Now you must do your best to please me," he said encouragingly. "Just remember that I want you to succeed. We will make the performance worthwhile. You do that now." "I'll try," said Carrie, brimming with affection and enthusiasm. "That's the girl," said Hurstwood fondly. "Now, remember," shaking an affectionate finger at her, "your best." "I will," she answered, looking back. The whole earth was brimming sunshine that morning. She tripped along, the clear sky pouring liquid blue into her soul. Oh, blessed are the children of endeavor in this, that they try and are hopeful. And blessed also are they who, knowing, smile and approve. Chapter 18. Just over the border, a hail and farewell. By the evening of the 16th, the subtle hand of Hurstwood had made itself apparent. He had given the word among his friends, and they were many and influential, that here was something which they ought to attend, and as a consequence the sale of tickets by Mr. Quincell, acting for the lodge, had been large. Small 4-line notes had appeared in all of the daily newspapers. These he had arranged for by the aid of one of his newspaper friends on the Times, Mr. Harry McGarren, the managing editor. "Say, Harry," Hurstwood said to him one evening, as the latter stood at the bar drinking before wending his belated way homeward, "you can help the boys out, I guess." "What is it?" said McGarren, pleased to be consulted by the opulent manager. "The Custer Lodge is getting up a little entertainment for their own good, and they'd like a little newspaper notice. You know what I mean, a squib or two saying that it's going to take place." "Certainly," said McGarren. "I can fix that for you, George." At the same time, Hurstwood kept himself wholly in the background. The members of Custer Lodge could scarcely understand why their little affair was taking so well. Mr. Harry Quincell was looked upon as quite a star for this sort of work. By the time the 16th had arrived, Hurstwood's friends had rallied like Romans to a senator's call. A well-dressed, good-natured, flatteringly inclined audience was assured from the moment he thought of assisting Carrie. That little student had mastered her part to her own satisfaction, much as she trembled for her fate when she should once face the gathered throng, behind the glare of the footlights. She tried to console herself with the thought that a score of other persons, men and women, were equally tremulous concerning the outcome of their efforts. But she could not disassociate the general danger from her own individual liability. She feared that she would forget her lines, that she might be unable to master the feeling which she now felt concerning her own movements in the play. At times she wished that she had never gone into the affair. At others she trembled lest she should be paralyzed with fear and stand white and gasping, not knowing what to say and spoiling the entire performance. In the matter of the company, Mr. Bamberger had disappeared. That hopeless example had fallen under the lance of the director's criticism. Mrs. Morgan was still present, but envious and determined, if for nothing more than spite, to do as well as Carrie at least. A loafing professional had been called in to assume the role of Ray, and while he was a poor stick of his kind, he was not troubled by any of those qualms which attack the spirit of those who have never faced an audience. He swatched about, cautioned though he was to maintain silence concerning his past theatrical relationships, in such a self-confident manner that he was like to convince everyone of his identity by mere matter of circumstantial evidence. "It is so easy," he said to Mrs. Morgan in the usual affected stage voice. "An audience would be the last thing to trouble me. It's the spirit of the part, you know, that is difficult." Carrie disliked his appearance, but she was too much the actress not to swallow his qualities with complacence, seeing that she must suffer his fictitious love for the evening. At 6 she was ready to go. Theatrical paraphernalia had been provided over and above her care. She had practiced her makeup in the morning, had rehearsed and arranged her material for the evening by 1 o'clock, and had gone home to have a final look at her part, waiting for the evening to come. On this occasion the lodge sent a carriage. Drouet rode with her as far as the door and then went about the neighboring stores, looking for some good cigars. The little actress marched nervously into her dressing room and began that painfully anticipated matter of makeup, which was to transform her, a simple maiden, to Laura, the belle of society. The flare of the gas jets, the open trunks, suggestive of travel and display, the scattered contents of the makeup box, rouge, pearl powder, whiting, burnt cork, India ink, pencils for eyelids, wigs, scissors, looking-glasses, drapery. In short, all the nameless paraphernalia of disguise have a remarkable atmosphere of their own. Since her arrival in the city, many things had influenced her, but always in a far removed manner. This new atmosphere was more friendly. It was wholly unlike the great brilliant mansions which waved her coldly away, permitting her only awe and distant wonder. This took her by the hand kindly as one who says, "My dear, come in." It opened for her as if for its own. She had wondered at the greatness of the names upon the billboards, the marvel of the long notices in the papers, the beauty of the dresses upon the stage, the atmosphere of carriages, flowers, refinement. Here was no illusion. Here was an open door to see all of that. She had come upon it as one who stumbles upon a secret passage, and behold, she was in the chamber of diamonds and delight. As she dressed with a flutter in her little stage room, hearing the voices outside, seeing Mr. Quincell hurrying here and there, noting Mrs. Morgan and Mrs. Hoagland at their nervous work of preparation, seeing all the 20 members of the cast moving about and worrying over what the result would be, she could not help thinking what a delight this would be if it would endure. How perfect a state if she could only do well now and then sometime get a place as a real actress. The thought had taken a mighty hold upon her. It hummed in her ears as the melody of an old song. Outside, in the little lobby, another scene was being enacted. Without the interest of Hurstwood, the little hall would probably have been comfortably filled, for the members of the lodge were moderately interested in its welfare. Hurstwood's word, however, had gone the rounds. It was to be a full dress affair. The 4 boxes had been taken. Dr. Norman McNeill Hale and his wife were to occupy one. This was quite a card. C.R. Walker, dry goods merchant and possessor of at least $200,000, had taken another. A well-known coal merchant had been induced to take a third, and Hurstwood and his friends the fourth. Among the latter was Drouet. The people who were now pouring here were not celebrities, nor even local nobilities in a general sense. They were the lights of a certain circle, the circle of small fortunes and secret order distinctions. These gentlemen Elks knew the standing of one another. They had regard for the ability which could amass a small fortune, own a nice home, keep a barouche or carriage, perhaps, wear fine clothes, and maintain a good mercantile position. Naturally, Hurstwood, who was a little above the order of mind which accepted this standard as perfect, who had shrewdness and much assumption of dignity, who held an imposing and authoritative position and commanded friendship by intuitive tact in handling people, was quite a figure. He was more generally known than most others in the same circle, and was looked upon as someone whose reserve covered a mine of influence and a solid financial prosperity. Tonight he was in his element. He came with several friends directly from Rector's in a carriage. In the lobby he met Drouet, who was just returning from a trip for more cigars. All 5 now joined in an animated conversation concerning the company present and the general drift of lodge affairs. "Who's here?" said Hurstwood, passing into the theater proper, where the lights were turned up and a company of gentlemen were laughing and talking in the open space back of the seats. "Why, how do you do, Mr. Hurstwood?" came from the first individual recognized. "Glad to see you," said the latter, grasping his hand lightly. "Looks quite an affair, doesn't it?" "Yes, indeed," said the manager. "Custer seems to have the backing of its members," observed the friend. "So it should," said the knowing manager. "I'm glad to see it." "Well, George," said another rotund citizen, whose avoirdupois made necessary an almost alarming display of starched shirt bosom, "how goes it with you?" "Excellent," said the manager. "What brings you over here? You're not a member of Custer." "Good nature," returned the manager. Like to see the boys, you know." "Wife here?" "She couldn't come tonight. She's not well." "Sorry to hear it. Nothing serious, I hope." "No, just feeling a little ill. I remember Mrs. Hurstwood when she was traveling once with you over to St. Joe." And here the newcomer launched off in a trivial recollection, which was terminated by the arrival of more friends. "Why, George, how are you?" said another genial West Side politician and lodge member. "My, but I'm glad to see you again. How are things, anyhow?" "Very well. I see you got the nomination for alderman." "Yes, we whipped them out over there without much trouble." "What do you suppose Hennessy will do now?" "Oh, he'll go back to his brick business. He's hard, you know." "I didn't know that," said the manager. "Felt pretty sore, I suppose, over his defeat." "Perhaps," said the other, winking shrewdly. Some of the more favored of his friends whom he had invited began to roll up in carriages now. They came shuffling in with a great show of finery and a much evident feeling of content and importance. "Here we are," said Hurstwood, turning to one from a group with whom he was talking. "That's right," returned the newcomer, a gentleman of about 45. "And say," he whispered jovially, pulling Hurstwood over by the shoulder so that he might whisper in his ear, "if this isn't a good show, I'll punch your head. You ought to pay for seeing your old friends. Bother the show." To another who inquired, "Is it something really good?" the manager replied, "I don't know, I suppose so." Then, lifting his hand graciously, For the lodge. Lots of boys out, eh? Yes, look up Shanahan. He was just asking for you a moment ago. It was thus that the little theatre resounded to a babble of successful voices, the creak of fine clothes, the commonplace of good nature, and all largely because of this man's bidding. Look at him any time within the half hour before the curtain was up. He was a member of an eminent group, a rounded company of 5 or more whose stout figures, large white bosoms, and shining pins bespoke the character of their success. The gentlemen who brought their wives called him out to shake hands. Seats clicked, ushers bowed while he looked blandly on. He was evidently a light among them, reflecting in his personality the ambitions of those who greeted him. He was acknowledged, fawned upon, in a way lionized. Through it all one could see the standing of the man. It was greatness in a way, small as it was.